Chapter 22. Tuji's Advance. Tuji smiled down at the raven, before giving the elf a gentle shove, sending the little bird on his way. Pharaoh the raven had turned out to be a pitiful creature, unwilling to do battle, even after Tuji offered Pharaoh the time he'd need to recover from his grievous injuries. Injuries that this hoplite had inflicted upon him with relative ease, if Tuji had heard the humiliation in Pharaoh's tone correctly. Pharaoh had been a legend that Tuji had wanted to face since he was a child. But now, Tuji crossed his arms as he stared at the retreating back of the limping raven. If Hoplite was able to reduce such a capable assassin to this crippled state. He smiled. Surely such a mighty warrior would accept his challenge, even if Hoplite knew that Tuji was pillar-born. A warrior such as Hoplite would not shirk such an opportunity to test his mettle, surely. Hoplite indeed would know just what he faced, once the challenge was proclaimed. A battle among mighty warriors such as they should be honest, after all. It was what his third father would want of him. Tuji briefly wondered if Hoplite himself could also be pillar-born. Another son of Zod, perhaps? Based on the injuries Hoplite had been capable of inflicting on Pharaoh, he would at least be descended from the Pillar of Might. If he was, then Tuji and Hoplite were destined to cross paths either way. Yet, now that he thought of it, Tuji had never seen Hoplite in the dream. Perhaps Tuji would recognize him once they met here in the waking world. There was always the chance that Hoplite was just an incredibly strong mortal, perhaps capable of channeling Foundation to increase his strength. Then Hoplite would need to draw on as much of the Golden Flame as he could in order to beat Tuji, as was fair in a duel between titans such as they. Tuji smirked as he turned his back to Pharaoh, walking over the field of bloodied Watcher corpses. Some still lived, of course. When Tuji ended up disabling an opponent without killing them, he never finished the job. What was the point of it if he had already won the fight? There was no honor in killing someone who couldn't continue Toma. If they insisted on continuing the fight, however, it would dishonor him and his opponent both if he did not go all out, even if they were essentially helpless. Tuji walked by the groaning bodies with barely a glance. They all avoided his gaze, eyes wide with the fear a pillar-born instilled in mortals. Would he be the one to bring an end to Dakuma? Perhaps. He'd rather not end an age. But Tuji had no intent on giving up the quest to ascend. He would be the fourth to rise to the Pillar of Might, and then he would challenge his father to a duel, and then the rest of the gods after that. Just for fun, of course. The gods could not die after all. Or could they? Tuji supposed he would find out once he defeated the other Pillarborn. There were many demigods who Tuji had met in Athena's hall, and he hadn't been impressed with the majority of them. The dream was chock full of puff chests and willowy fools that would not be suitable candidates for ascension. Tuji did his share in thinning the herd of incompetence, of course. But despite his efforts, Tuji guessed that there were still a few more years before the chaff would be properly excised. When only the strongest remained, that was when the real godling war would begin.
"Scum,"
a wheezing voice said from the ground.
"You will not escape this forest alive."
Tuji stopped to stare at the slowly rising form of Moreau, the captain of the Night Watchers. His left forearm had been smashed nearly flat, Tuji having crushed it before tossing the captain high into the air. Tuji crossed his arms as his smirk deepened.
"I got in easy. Leaving will be just as trivial,"
Tuji told the Night Captain honestly.
"Now, do you wish to continue, Toma?"
He glared into the elf's eyes, leaving his emotions completely open for Moreau to read, projecting sheer killing intent. The Fakin didn't even flinch beneath Tuji's gaze, and the godling's admiration for the Night Captain grew tenfold. Tuji himself could not read the elf's emotions, his orcish blood muddying the power of his Doka. He did know of other half-breeds who had unlocked their own Doka through great effort, but would that be worth the time he'd need to spend to unlock it? Perhaps.
"Pillarborn,"
Moreau spat.
"You will not be suffered to live,"
Moreau shouted, darting forward with a fist raised. Tuji sighed as the Night Captain came upon him, knowing exactly how this was going to end. The godling sidestepped the oncoming blow, driving his fingers through Moreau's ribcage before he ripped it straight from the Fakin's torso with an explosion of bloody gore. The Fakin collapsed to the grassy field, facing a rictus of agonies as his eyes went dead. Tuji would have let Moreau live, had he just let Tuji walk away. But the Fakin had wanted to continue Toma, and Tuji would not dishonor the brave elf by sparing him. Tuji flicked the blood from his hand as he walked away from the body, his eyes firmly on the tree line. There were no elves there waiting or watching. All had fled. More would return, and braver watchers would likely try to stop his escape. Something that would be impossible, unless they could channel Foundation. Even then, they'd have to be a particularly powerful mage to challenge Tuji and survive, much less triumph. It was time to run. Tuji braced against the ground on all fours, leaning back before launching into a powerful ground-tearing sprint. It was to the east he would need to go. His quarries had headed in that direction to pass the Fiend Wall. As for Hoplite, Pharaoh didn't seem to know much about where he had been headed, but Tuji had a feeling in his gut that he could be found at the Fiend Wall as well. His third father had a way of tugging Tuji in the direction of his next challenge, and right now, that urge pulled him to the east. His quarries, and Hoplite too perhaps, would be found at the Fiend Wall. Tuji briefly considered what he should do after the Toma to come. Tuji would grow exponentially more powerful after defeating his foes. Perhaps he could challenge the legendary Lord of Hatred himself. The thought of defeating such a legendary figure as Kazan excited Tuji so much that he upped his pace. The sooner he found and defeated his quarries, the sooner he'd be able to battle Kazan. Small holes were punched in the dirt as he ran, kicking up a gust of dirt that seemed to chase Tuji like a tsunami. An easily followable trail, as was his intent. Tuji would face anyone that would deign to follow it. Word had likely already spread that a Pillarborn was in the bastion. Watchers had a way of spreading info to the Harkal quickly. Tuji wasn't quite sure how they did it, but Watchers must have had some kind of ability that allowed them to communicate with the Harkal from anywhere. Either that, or they could teleport directly to the Harkal. He wasn't entirely certain. Oh, what he wouldn't give to battle the entirety of the Harkal, especially Fire Eyes Turlin. Tuji collided with a tree shortly after passing into the forest, the trunk splintering as he went. Tuji had barely noticed the obstacle until he had finished passing through it, hearing the tree fall to the earth with a loud crash of crunching branches. Tuji felt a pang of guilt at destroying the tree. He hadn't meant to do that. The blood-curdling scream of the Fae he had killed by mistake ripped into his very soul. That had been dishonorable. He'd not break another if he could help it. Tuji needed to keep his mind on track. If he let the guilt consume him now, then he'd never get out of these woods. Now that he was focused purely on the sprint, Tuji was better able to weave around the trees. He could have just run straight through each and every single one that got in his path. It would have barely slowed him down, but trees and the Fae that inhabited them couldn't fight back. It was dishonorable to destroy a living thing that could not engage in proper Toma. Killing an ant would have been more honorable than destroying a Fae, for the ant had the means to fight. Their size was not a factor in Toma. He sped past more elves, not watchers, just citizens of the bastion going about their business, living in their moving trees. They all screamed in terror at seeing him, but Tuji did not intend to harm these Fakin. These were not warriors, and they certainly would not accept any challenges from him. Best to leave them be. He found it hard to distinguish the mobile tree creatures from the immobile ones at times, often having to adjust his course to avoid smashing into moving homes. Fighting one of those may be honorable. They could at least fight back. But then, were they really trees? Tuji was not certain, though they certainly looked the part, save for the writhing roots that they used to move about. He continued his musings for a long while, until a crossbow bolt flew from a high branch above him. The bolt hit Tuji in the throat, causing him to gag and stumble in his stride. The bolt hadn't pierced his steel flesh, of course, but having a crossbow bolt thud into his throat still managed to trigger his gag reflex. Tuji looked above to see where the bolt had come from, digging his heels into the dirt to stop his momentum. Twin trails of dirt followed his heels until he finally came to a stop, straining his eyes to see where the attacker could be. After all, Tuji took an ambush as a challenge. Ambushes were completely fair in Toma. It had been Tuji's own fault that he hadn't been properly prepared for one. That had been something that he was taught in the jungles in the north. The tribal peoples of Florovis had been wise teachers, making sure to paint Tuji with the many scars he now possessed. For every mistake he had made against them, they had inflicted harsh lessons that would stay with Tuji until the end of time. That was before his steel body had fully manifested, of course. But the lessons had still stuck with him. He squinted as he tried to find the challenger. But damn his eyes, he could not see them. These Watchers' color-shifting cloaks put the camouflage of the jungle warriors to shame. Even still, he would not back down from this elf now. Tuji had been formally issued a challenge. It was his honor on the line, if he chose to flee and give this Watcher victory. Tuji had only ever lost Toma once in his life. He'd not lose it again if he could help it. The Watcher surely must have changed positions by now, not wanting the first bolt's trajectory to give him away. So that begged the question, where were they? He strained his eyes to the best of his ability, but no matter where he looked, Tuji simply could not place where the Watcher could be. Then he grinned as he was struck with inspiration, digging his hands deep into the soil at his feet, and flinging it towards the tall branches. The soil flew high and landed cleanly on the bark, and Tuji threw more, until finally, on the tree to his left, the dirt seemed to hover above one of the branches. Tuji jumped high, coming face to face with the Watcher before he lashed out with a kick. His foot collided with the Watcher's chest with a crunch, the Watcher giving a bloody rasping cry as he was sent flying into another tree far behind the one he'd been perched upon. The body exploded into a gory mess, the cloak now fully visible from the coat of red now adorning its cloth. The fallen Watcher then slid down the tree in a heap, painting the bark crimson as the body came to rest at the base of the tree. Tuji turned and continued his sprint. Another victory tallied in his mind. How high had that branch been? 20 paces? 30? Tuji was still getting stronger, it seemed. Just the month before, he'd only been able to jump 10 paces high. Other challengers appeared on his path, slowing his advance toward the bastion, but otherwise succumbing to his might. His footprints and a trail of broken fake-hidden bodies marked his path, hopefully warning away any new challengers. Tuji found himself wanting to reach Hoplite quickly, before the man left the Fiend Wall. These new challengers had been welcome, of course. Tuji hadn't wanted to dishonor them, but now he wished that they would just cower away, so he could get out of the Feywood quicker. Out of the dozens of Watchers that challenged him, only a few were left that were still alive afterward. Barely alive. They could not fight back. Therefore, Toma had been concluded, for it would bring dishonor upon him to finish off the helpless. More victories tallied up until he finally reached the bastion, standing before the looming wall of writhing brown roots with arms crossed. Tuji would need to do this as he had before, which was to say, as quickly as he was able. His hands gripped one of the wriggling roots, and he launched himself skyward before the roots could tangle themselves around him. Like the last time he did this, Tuji repeated the motion until he was at the top of the wall, the roots now beginning to whip angrily at his flesh. To a normal man, perhaps these blows would have stripped flesh or fractured bone, but to Tuji they felt like mere bug bites, little itches on his skin. He was forced to step quickly to avoid the snaring roots trying to drag him below. He may be strong, but he was not sure how he would escape the wall of roots once he was fully engulfed within it. The Ilum tree still loomed far behind him, far taller than even this massive wall of magical roots. It would likely be a more pleasing sight to him had he not been busy trying not to be engulfed by the Ilum's tendrils. Once he reached the ledge, he leapt, intending to land cleanly on his feet at the bottom of the wall. It was unfortunate that Tuji hadn't noticed that one of the roots had managed to wrap itself firmly around his ankle. The world was flipped as Tuji was sent spinning end over end, laughing with glee as he went. The root that had tangled around his leg snapped off during the jump, thankfully. Otherwise, more roots might have been able to entangle him further, to draw him within. Tuji hit the ground 6 seconds later, landing on the top of his head and creating a small crater where his skull had impacted. He groaned as he adjusted himself, coming to sit upright while cradling the top of his skull. He would have been fine had he landed on his feet. Now he was dizzy and his head hurt a bit. Ah well. Tuji then stood from the ground with a small groan, giving his cheeks a good wake-up slap before promptly breaking into a sprint once more. It took a while before the dizziness fully faded, but once it did, he ran faster, excited to face off against Hoplite. To the Fiend Wall he went. Hopefully the warrior would still be there by the time Tuji arrived. Their battle would shake the earth beneath their feet. Arculus would weep with joy at the worthy blood being shed upon her soil. And his third father Zod would smile down with approval upon their duel. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you're new here, welcome aboard. Check out the description for the story and join the Discord if you like. Consider supporting the channel and the author as well. It's a dangerous world out there, but remember to be brave and look up to seek the stars.